They said the wedding would be unforgettable, but not for the reasons I imagined. As I stepped into the glittering grand hall, the chandeliers casting golden light across marble floors, I felt every pair of eyes land on me. My dress, simple yet graceful, clung softly to me, but instead of admiration, I was met with snickers. Whispers spread like wildfire, cheap, out of place, why would she even wear that here? Their words stung, yet I walked forward with quiet resolve. My ex's bride smirked triumphantly, thinking I had humiliated myself. But the night held a twist, one that none of them saw coming. The very designer of this so-called cheap dress was about to walk through those doors and shatter their arrogance forever. The envelope lay on my kitchen counter like it carried poison. I had recognized his handwriting instantly, neat and deliberate, the way he used to scribble notes to me in college. My hands trembled as I slid a finger under the flap and pulled out the cream-colored card. "You are cordially invited." The words blurred as I reached his name, stitched elegantly beside hers. My ex. My first love. The man I once believed I'd spend forever with. And now he was inviting me to watch him promise forever to someone else. Shock froze me in place at first, then came the bitterness. How dare he? Did he want me there as some cruel reminder of what I had lost, or worse, what he thought I could never live up to? The memories of our breakup replayed uninvited, sharp and merciless. His sudden coldness. The way he drifted toward her before we were even officially done. The loneliness that followed. I should have torn the invitation in two, tossed it in the trash, and moved on. But curiosity tugged at me, stubborn and relentless. What did she look like up close, this woman he left me for? Would he seem truly happy with her, or was it all a facade? I showed the invitation to my closest friends that evening, their eyes widening as though it were a weapon pointed at me. "You can't go," Mia said flatly, folding her arms. "It's a trap. He just wants to rub it in your face." Another friend chimed in, shaking her head. "Seriously, what good could come of it? You'll only end up hurt." They were protective, fierce in their loyalty, but their words only fed the fire building inside me. I didn't want to go to wallow or beg for scraps of his attention. I wanted to prove something. Not to him, not even to her, but to myself. That I could walk into that room, see him standing at the altar with someone else, and hold my head high. That I wasn't broken, even if the scars of heartbreak still lingered. So while my friends groaned in disbelief, I tucked the invitation back into its envelope and slid it into my purse. "I'm going," I said quietly but firmly. "Not for him, not for her. For me." And just like that, the decision was made. The first stone laid on a path I had no idea would twist into something far beyond what I, or anyone else, expected. The week leading up to the wedding felt heavier than I expected. Every time I looked at the invitation, my stomach tightened. If I was really going, I couldn't just show up in any outfit. The thought of walking into that grand event, surrounded by silk gowns and diamond jewelry, made me feel exposed before I had even stepped foot in the venue. So, one afternoon, I forced myself into the chaos of the shopping district, hoping to find something that would shield me. The first store was blinding. Rows of glittering dresses displayed under harsh white lights. Sequins caught my eyes from every direction, gowns priced higher than a month's rent. The saleswoman gave me a once-over, her smile polite but thin, like she'd already measured me and decided I didn't belong. "Can I help you?" she asked, though her tone suggested I should hurry up and leave. I pretended to browse, touching fabrics that felt heavy with wealth I couldn't afford, before slipping back out onto the street. The next few shops weren't much better. Each dress seemed more elaborate than the last. Feathers, rhinestones, layers of tulle designed to scream for attention. They weren't me. And worse, they reminded me of her. The bride-to-be, with her perfectly styled hair and carefully curated life, would likely wear something just as loud, something meant to dazzle and dominate. I didn't want to compete with her. I just wanted to feel like myself again. By the time I stumbled onto a narrow side street, I was ready to give up. That's when I saw it. A little boutique tucked between a cafe and an antique bookstore. Its window display wasn't flashy, just a mannequin draped in a soft, flowing gown that looked both understated and timeless. Something about it pulled me inside. The shop was quiet, warm, and smelled faintly of lavender. A middle-aged woman behind the counter greeted me without judgment, her eyes kind instead of calculating. I wandered among the racks until I found it. The dress. It wasn't extravagant. No glitter, no bold colors. Just a gentle shade of ivory, fabric that felt like it was meant to breathe with me rather than suffocate me. When I tried it on, I saw something unexpected in the mirror. Not a woman desperate to outshine her ex's new wife, but someone standing tall, serene, and quietly strong. It wasn't about the price tag. It couldn't have been, because compared to the other shops, this dress felt almost simple. What mattered was the way it made me feel. I didn't need to sparkle under chandeliers or compete with diamonds. I needed to show myself that I could walk into that hall with dignity intact, no matter how many whispers followed me. I bought it without hesitation, tucking it carefully into the garment bag as though it carried a piece of my soul. I didn't know then that the dress carried a secret of its own, a hidden value no one, not even I, could have imagined. To me, it wasn't a weapon or a statement of wealth. It was armor, woven not from fabric alone, but from the quiet confidence I thought I had lost. The day of the wedding arrived sooner than I wanted it to. My reflection in the mirror that morning was calm, almost deceptive, as though the storm of nerves inside me wasn't visible to the outside world. I slipped into the dress, smoothing the fabric over my hips, and for a moment, I let myself breathe. It wasn't flashy, but it was me. I whispered a quiet reminder to myself before leaving, "You're not here to win. You're here to stand tall." The venue was impossible to miss. A sprawling estate on the edge of town, it rose like a palace, its tall white pillars gleaming against the afternoon sun. Crystal chandeliers hung even outside the entrance, their glass prisms throwing sparks of light across polished marble steps. Luxury cars lined the driveway, sleek, expensive machines that practically hissed at my modest little sedan as I parked it in the farthest corner. My heart beat faster as I stepped out, clutching my small clutch bag like a lifeline. Inside, the hall was even grander. Gold trim along vaulted ceilings, velvet drapes cascading like waterfalls, and flower arrangements so massive they looked like entire gardens uprooted and displayed indoors. Everywhere I turned, there were sequins, silk, and jewels, each guest more extravagantly dressed than the last. It was as if wealth itself had been poured into human form and invited to mingle over champagne. And then there was me. The shift in the atmosphere when I walked in was subtle but sharp. Heads turned, and eyes lingered on me longer than necessary. I caught the flicker of raised eyebrows, the curve of smirks, the quick whisper behind a manicured hand. My chest tightened, but I forced my chin upward, my steps measured. Still, it was impossible to block out the sting of their words as they floated through the air. "Is that really what she wore? Looks like something off a bargain rack. I heard she's been struggling since the breakup. Guess it shows." The laughter wasn't loud, but it was cruel, sharpened by the confidence of those who believed I couldn't hear them. I spotted familiar faces, old acquaintances from college, mutual friends who had long since taken his side. Their eyes scanned me with the kind of pity that was worse than mockery. They gathered in little circles, whispering, glancing my way, then giggling like teenagers at a high school dance. One woman, someone who had once been friendly to me, leaned close to her companion and said just loudly enough for me to catch, "Honestly, I almost feel sorry for her. Imagine showing up here like that." The words dug deep, but I swallowed hard and kept moving, the soft fabric of my dress brushing against my legs as though reminding me not to falter. I found my seat toward the back, away from the clusters of sparkling gowns and champagne glasses. From there, I had a clear view of the stage where he would soon appear with his bride, hand in hand, the perfect picture of happiness. I told myself I had come to prove I was strong, but in that moment, strength felt like a mask slipping from my face. Every laugh, Every pointed glance chipped away at the wall I had built. I sat quietly, surrounded by strangers and yet feeling more exposed than ever. And somewhere across the room, I caught the bride's eye. She was radiant in her glittering gown, jewels dripping like raindrops from her ears, but the smile she gave me wasn't one of kindness, it was victory. Smug, satisfied victory. The humiliation was only beginning. The ceremony hadn't even started when the whispers around me began to sharpen into daggers. At first it was murmurs, sly glances passed between jeweled guests, but soon the words carried across the room, no longer hidden behind polite hands. A woman in a shimmering emerald gown leaned toward her husband, her laughter carrying as she said, "Can you believe she showed up in that? Looks like something you'd find in a bargain bin clearance rack." Her husband chuckled, not bothering to lower his voice. "Honestly, I've seen better at thrift stores." I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, though I kept my eyes fixed on the stage. My fingers gripped the fabric of my clutch, knuckles whitening. It wasn't just their words, it was the ease with which they said them, like I wasn't even there, like my presence was only fuel for their amusement. Soon, it wasn't just one couple. The bride's circle of bridesmaids, all dripping in identical sequined gowns that looked like liquid gold, huddled together, giggling as their eyes swept over me. One of them whispered something, and the bride herself, radiant in her glittering gown, threw her head back in laughter. The sound echoed across the hall, striking me harder than I expected. Then she leaned forward, pretending to whisper but loud enough for me and half the room to hear. Well, at least she tried. The mockery stung sharper because of the sweetness she laced it with, as though pity were a blade disguised in silk. Laughter rippled through the crowd, subtle but unmistakable. I sat frozen, aware that every smirk, every sideways glance, every muffled chuckle was aimed directly at me. It was as though my dress, simple and elegant in my own eyes, had been transformed into a clown costume under their gaze. I told myself to stay calm, to lift my chin higher, to refuse them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I adjusted my posture, placed my shoulders back, forced myself to breathe evenly. But inside, a storm of doubt roared louder with every second. Maybe they were right. Maybe I did look cheap, foolish, out of place in this palace of gold and marble. Maybe I had been naive to believe a simple gown could carry me through this night without shame. My gaze wandered across the room, and I caught the smirk of an old acquaintance, someone who used to smile warmly at me in college but now looked at me as though I were a spectacle on display. She nudged the woman beside her, both of them dissolving into laughter that they didn't even bother to hide. My chest tightened. My throat burned with the effort of swallowing back tears that threatened to betray me. I wanted to leave. More than anything, I wanted to walk out of that hall, let the heavy doors close behind me, and never look back. But my feet refused to move. Something deeper than humiliation anchored me to that seat. Pride, maybe. Or stubbornness. Or the faint, desperate hope that I wouldn't end the night as the punchline they wanted me to be. So I sat there, feeling the walls closing in, my head high but my heart cracking. Every laugh was another strike, every whisper another wound. And though I tried to remind myself why I had come, to prove my strength, to prove I was not broken, the truth was gnawing at me from the inside. For the first time since slipping into that dress, I wasn't sure if it had been armor at all. Maybe it was just a target painted across my body, inviting them to aim, to fire, to ridicule until there was nothing left of me but fragments of who I had once been. The night was far from over, but already, I felt like I had lost. The reception was in full swing, a blur of clinking glasses, laughter, and the steady hum of a string quartet tucked into the corner. I sat quietly at my table, trying to disappear into the folds of the evening. The sting of earlier mockery clung to me like a second skin, no matter how many times I straightened my shoulders or forced myself to smile. The bride glided through the room like a queen basking in her coronation, her sequined entourage orbiting her, their eyes occasionally darting back to me with poorly disguised amusement. I kept my gaze fixed on the tablecloth, tracing its embroidered patterns just to avoid theirs. Then, a ripple moved through the crowd. Subtle at first, then swelling into a wave that drew every eye toward the entrance. Conversations faltered, laughter dimmed, and the quartet's music suddenly seemed louder against the sudden hush. I looked up, curious despite myself, and saw him. A tall man, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, entered with a kind of presence that commanded attention without needing to demand it. His face was familiar, familiar enough that it sent a shock through the room. Whispers spread faster than champagne bubbles. His name, his reputation, his genius. A world-renowned fashion designer, the kind whose collections sold out in minutes, the kind whose creations were spoken of like art rather than clothing. And here he was, in this hall, walking as though he had chosen this wedding specifically to grace with his presence. I watched as he scanned the room, his gaze sweeping over jeweled gowns, sequined dresses, shimmering tuxedos. For a moment, I thought he was merely making an entrance, letting the anticipation build. But then his eyes stopped. They stopped on me. My breath caught. He didn't just glance. He looked, deeply, deliberately, as though I were the only person in that cavernous hall worth noticing. And then, to the shock of everyone around us, he walked straight toward me. The whispers rose again, sharp and incredulous. Guests twisted in their seats, craning their necks to confirm that yes, he was really heading for her. The girl in the cheap dress. The one they had laughed at. The bride herself faltered mid-laugh, her smile faltering as he bypassed her golden circle entirely and crossed the floor with unwavering steps. When he reached me, his expression softened into something unexpected. Admiration. "Excuse me," he said, his voice rich and calm, carrying enough weight to hush the whispers instantly. "I couldn't help but notice your gown." He looked me over, not with judgment, but with the careful eye of an artist. "It's one of mine. And I must say, you wear it better than I ever imagined when I designed it." The room froze. Utter silence. Forks hung in midair, glasses paused before lips. Every single guest who had laughed at me earlier now stared, wide-eyed, at the designer who had just spoken. I felt the blood rush to my face, but this time it wasn't from humiliation. Around us, the silence stretched, thick with disbelief. The designer smiled warmly at me and added, "Thank you for giving it life tonight." And just like that, the balance of the evening shifted. For a heartbeat, I could barely process what had just happened. The designer, the man whose name commanded entire runways, was standing in front of me, his hand extended, his eyes alight with genuine admiration. The same room that had moments ago echoed with laughter at my expense was now suffocating in stunned silence. Slowly, hesitantly, I placed my hand in his. He gave it a gentle squeeze, then turned slightly, addressing the crowd as though he had expected their disbelief. "This gown," he began, his voice smooth yet firm, "is one of my rarest designs. In fact, it was never officially released. Only 3 of them exist in the world." A collective gasp rippled through the guests, their jeweled collars and sequined dresses suddenly seeming gaudy in comparison. I felt dozens of eyes snap back to me, scanning my dress again with new awareness, as though seeing it for the first time. The designer continued, his tone carrying the authority of someone used to lecturing entire fashion houses. "It may look simple to the untrained eye, but simplicity is deceptive. Every seam is hand-stitched, the fabric custom-dyed in a process that takes months. The cut is deliberate, meant to highlight strength rather than vanity. I created it for women who do not need embellishment to be noticed. Women whose confidence is their accessory." Whispers broke out around the hall. "Unreleased." Someone gasped. "Hand-stitched." Another murmured. One of the bridesmaids, the same one who had laughed loudest earlier, turned pale, her sequins suddenly looking cheap under the chandeliers. I sat frozen, my heart thundering, while the designer looked back at me with a soft smile. "And tonight," he said, his gaze unwavering, "she has proven exactly why I designed it. The dress was waiting for the right person to wear it, and it has found her. The weight of his words pressed down on the crowd. I could feel the shift in the air. The same people who had smirked, whispered, and laughed now sat stiffly in their chairs, their shame bleeding through their silence. I caught sight of the bride across the room, her painted smile cracking, her hand gripping her champagne glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Her circle of bridesmaids avoided my eyes entirely, suddenly fascinated with their plates of untouched food. The designer wasn't finished. He lifted a hand toward the gown, not touching, but gesturing with reverence. "Do you know what makes this dress priceless?" he asked the room. "It's not the rarity. It's not even the craftsmanship. It's the courage it takes to wear something so unassuming into a place where everyone else is desperate to be seen. She didn't wear it to impress. She wore it to be herself." Gasps, murmurs, the scraping of chairs, it all blurred into a haze as his words sank into the glittering crowd like stones sinking in water. Those who had ridiculed me just hours before now looked stricken, their arrogance dismantled piece by piece. Their silence was louder than any laughter had been. And for the first time that night, I no longer felt small. The silence that followed the designer's words was almost deafening. A moment ago, the room had been alive with laughter and whispers at my expense. Now, no one dared to speak. Faces that had been twisted with amusement were suddenly flushed with embarrassment. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding one another's eyes, their jewelry and gowns no longer glittering with the same authority. I could see it clearly, the realization sinking in, the weight of their own cruelty mirrored back at them. The bridesmaids, once so smug in their sequined armor, sat rigid and pale. One of them toyed nervously with her champagne flute, her earlier laughter dissolving into a tight-lipped grimace. Another pretended to be deeply engrossed in her phone, as though hiding behind a glowing screen could erase the memory of her ridicule. The transformation was almost dizzying. These same women who had judged me mercilessly now shrank beneath the truth they couldn't undo. And then there was the bride. She rose gracefully, forcing a smile so wide it almost cracked her flawless makeup. "Well," she began, her voice too sweet, "isn't that just lovely? What a coincidence that she ended up with such a special piece." The attempt at control was transparent, brittle as glass. She laughed lightly, hoping others would join in, but the sound fell flat in the silence. Not even her loyal circle rushed to back her up. Her eyes flickered toward me, sharp and calculating. For the first time that evening, her confidence faltered. I met her gaze steadily, no words needed. The smirk she had given me earlier was gone, replaced by a tightness that betrayed her unease. She knew, just as everyone else did, that the moment had slipped from her grasp. My ex stood nearby, his expression a storm of confusion and regret. His jaw tightened, his brows furrowed as though he was wrestling with emotions he hadn't expected to feel. Shock, certainly, but beneath it, something else flickered in his eyes. Recognition, regret, perhaps even shame. He stared at me longer than he should have, his bride's hand resting lightly on his arm, but he didn't seem to notice her touch. For the first time since we'd parted, I felt the shift of power between us tilt in my favor. And I didn't need to say a single word. As the designer lingered beside me, still speaking with admiration, the truth settled into the room like dust after a storm. They had mocked me, dismissed me, written me off as nothing, only to be proven wrong in the most public, undeniable way. The weight I'd been carrying since I walked through those doors lifted. The sting of humiliation, the ache of doubt, they melted away, replaced by something stronger than pride. Dignity. Strength. I hadn't needed sequins or diamonds to command respect. All I had needed was the courage to walk into that hall as myself. When I finally rose from my chair, smoothing the gown with steady hands, I felt taller than I ever had before. Eyes followed me, but they weren't mocking anymore. They were wide, reverent, even ashamed. And with every step I knew, I hadn't just survived the night, I had reclaimed it. That night, I didn't simply attend my ex's wedding, I rewrote the script they had written for me. They expected me to be the girl who crumbled under laughter, the one who bowed her head in shame. Instead, the truth flipped their cruelty into silence, their arrogance into humiliation. The dress had been a symbol, yes, but the real victory was realizing I never needed their approval. As I walked out of that grand hall, every eye followed, no longer mocking, only respectful. And I understood, true revenge is quiet, graceful, and dignified departure.